Yeah. Right. I'd like to welcome everybody. My name is Sean Dezay and I'm the SPE London YP Chair. We're very excited today to have Jamie Payne from Accenture, who will be talking us through the energy transition, specifically within Upstream. Jamie is a manager at Accenture's UK energy practice, and he's got a vast experience working within the industry as a site engineer and also as a offshore commission engineer within EPCC and FEED projects. Within Accenture, he works with an array of clients, across the oil and gas majors and service companies, helping them with kind of navigating through the challenges that they're currently facing, both from a technology perspective, but also from an operations perspective, production perspective, and also from a emissions and energy transition perspective. So it's a pleasure to have him today. In terms of some ground rules, I think if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to post them in the chat, and we'll try to pick those up either during the presentation or towards the end. We'll have a Q&A segment towards the end as well. And yeah, without further ado, the floor is yours, Jamie.
Yeah, thanks very much, Juan. And firstly, kind of before kicking off, a big thank you for inviting me today to kind of speak on this topic. I'm guessing a number of you would have heard a number of talks or seen a lot of presentations on this topic. I'm sure you've read lots, but as always, I think it's important to kind of build our opinions from a number of different sources. So I encourage you to kind of speak out, ask questions in the chat. As Sean said, I want us to try and be a bit more of a fun and interactive session. So we'll do a bit of an introduction. We have a bit of Mentimeter, so I hope you have either a phone or you can use your laptop to ask some questions. Then we'll talk about some industry challenges and trends today, where we are progressing so far, and then a bit of the closing remarks and a bit of time for Q&A at the end. So as I said, please do ask some questions. I want to try and make it a bit more fun and interactive than normal. All right, so first off then, I think if you can go onto menti.com, and if you type in the passcode there that you see on the screen, and just maybe note down the passcode on a piece of paper so you have it for later, because we'll be coming back to Menti. So the first question we just want to kind of get your point of view on is what does the energy transition mean to you? Maybe just if somebody could put the passcode just in the chat for people. It should also be in there on the top. So we'll start to see, hopefully, your answers come through at just transition. Okay. Less emissions, yeah. Change to net zero. Green New Deals, okay. Anything else out there? Net zero, the future. Here we go, starting to come in. Necessary, very true. I think as critical as we see that kind of come through from all the latest in the news and what's going on in the world at the moment, right? Less emissions, cleaner planet, climate change, decarbonisation, all topics that we'll touch on in throughout the presentation today. Digital, that's very interesting, and be interested to see kind of that person's views kind of going forward, as that's definitely part of the way going forward. Buzzwords, fair comment, transformation. Brilliant. Okay, I think that's quite a good insight into who we have on the call and where your ideas are today, right? So what I thought I'd now do is kind of give you a bit of just an understanding of where we see the energy transition, so and what we understand for it, right? The energy transition is a long-term structural change in energy systems, from fossil fuel-based systems to net zero carbon ones. Now, it's a multifaceted problem, as I'm all sure we're all aware, in driving companies to target holistic emissions reductions, from core operations to indirect consumers and supply chain emissions. Given developments across technology, regulation, and markets, and in line with evolving customer patterns, companies should identify interlinkages across industry value chains and opportunities for wider ecosystem participation to capture and retain value. Now, hopefully, kind of throughout the presentation today, we'll kind of touch on a number of these points here. But I think it's just interesting. Everyone kind of has what they hold the energy transition to be for themselves, right? I see it as ultimately it's our careers for the next 30 years, and that's why I'm excited for one to be working in this sector, as I see it as a kind of critical to helping the planet kind of move forward. Now, I think also one of the kind of key messages today I want to kind of share with you is just the range of opportunities within this sector right now. Gone are the days, I think, within engineering, have to kind of work down the classical routes. I think there's much more opportunity now for a diverse kind of workforce, and you'll hopefully see that as well as the new skills and the markets open up. So firstly, I think what's always important is just to outline some of the key distinctions and where we see some of the terminology today. Now, just on the screen, there's just kind of a few of the main ones. What we're seeing a lot in probably the industry and our clients talking is carbon neutrality and net zero is an interesting one that's popping up a lot within companies' pledges and roadmaps to net zero. I think what's important to note is that carbon neutrality is only focused on carbon dioxide emissions, whereas net zero is looking at complete greenhouse gases. It's things like this which are just important to understand when you're reading the documentation that you see, so you get a full picture of what we're actually kind of saying here. There you go. Now, I'm sure you've all gone to a number of presentations on and to do with this subject, and everyone has their favorite slide on how they kind of introduce and set the context for the conversation. Now, this is probably my favorite one, as I think it just sums it up in one simple slide. It kind of relates back to kind of Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. I'm not sure if any of you guys have seen that YouTube video, but that to me was quite staggering, and I think it was a landmark presentation at its time. This view in front of you shows the temperature datings back 1,000 years, and then correlates that also with the CO2 global levels. Now, what the staggering views and what everyone I think really took sight of when they first saw this was the huge increase within those kind of last 40 years, right? 73% increase in those average temperatures, and almost 50% in the last 10 years. I think this was a bit of a changing point when this information was shown with through those presentations. Now, so I think we can all agree that the energy transition is front and center in some of the media spotlight today. And I'm sure you read it almost on a daily basis these days, right? And we are seeing that with our clients. There's a general trend and agreement on the need to decarbonize. And it is definitely starting to become part of their fabric of their companies. We're seeing new business units being set up. But then I guess we'll talk a bit more about how the companies are progressing. But I think it's important to understand that, look, when you're reading all of this in the news today, there's also there's a lot of what they're calling kind of greenwashing as well coming in, right? So you've got to be careful about what you read. I think that's a key point for me kind of going forward is read as much as you can on the topic, stay as knowledgeable as you can. It is, as I said, the kind of our careers for the next 30 years, and it's critical to understand what's going on. So why now? I think again, it should be pretty obvious, right? the Global Paris Agreement, I think, was probably the big landmark one here in 2016, where we aligned as a global planet on the 2 degrees. But the question really is, what have we done since then, right? We had the recent COP, and again, if we're looking at what we said back in Paris and where we wanted to be to, I think if we're honest with ourselves, we haven't quite met that. And I think it's now going to be really important on how we move forward to date, right? So we're now saying that we kind of need to cut global emissions by 40% by 2030, and that there's a general acceptance that we need to really act within the next 8 years, right? Now, if we're thinking about that in the upstream projects area and capital projects and the lead times that we need for big projects, you've got to then scale that down. Really, we probably got to act really within the next kind of 4 to 5 years, and we'll kind of share more information on investments and how that affects the investments and the price of moving later on. It almost kind of moves up to about 5 times. But we'll come and touch on that later. But I think why act now is because it's absolutely critical in order to, if we're going to start moving and shifting our kind of portfolios, then we know how long it takes in the upstream sector to do that. So industry trends and challenges. So across the kind of the oil and gas industry, but then also kind of focused, I guess, primarily within upstream as we're talking today, right? There's a lot of stakeholder pressure. So we're seeing the boards change on some of the big majors out there in the world. The increase in governments pressurizing the likes of Shell, Equinor, the EU majors. And then I guess particularly focused on the kind of diversification of the upstream portfolios, right? With the ban on new wells and companies broadening into new ventures, offshore wind, solar, hydrogen, CCUS, these are the kind of the hottest topics of today. Where I guess they're largely proven technologies when compared to the likes of direct air capture. Looking at kind of technology disruption, right? It's going to be absolutely critical. These are kind of come hand in hand now with the move to net zero. As we'll talk about it later, but this is a key one for companies where they are today in their transition as they're moving from old systems into new. We're seeing a huge change in data and how companies look at data. So how are countries kind of varying in their current pace and their change, right? So I think it's quite a stark map when you look at this. I think the net zero targets, we can all agree they're quite vague in how they were kind of initially set out. And when you try to dig a little bit deeper underneath them, there's not that much to them. What we see in the energy transition, and I know the IEA talk about this a lot, is that the energy transition will be strengthening the petrostates like Russia, very topical at the moment, right? And how they kind of move and stabilize the market, right? Now, an interesting one on here is Germany. So Germany post Fukushima obviously has decided and made the choice to shut down its nuclear plants. Now, while we see Germany as a country kind of potentially one of the leaders in the transition in their wind sectors, I'm not sure how much no, but today they actually kind of coal is their top energy source for electricity in the country at 24%. Now they're looking to move that out and move away from it by 2030, but with the shutdown of the Nord Stream 2, they're now having to rethink those goals and initial setups. So the geopolitics and how that affects the energy transition is another reason for me why I find this a fascinating subject, and I absolutely love it. But it makes it a lot more complicated, and again, it's something I'd encourage all of you to kind of read into and stay up to date with. So we have, as kind of Accenture recently done, kind of surveys with oil and gas executives, as we're kind of reaching out to the market to see where people's interests and understandings lie, right? And I think what we can say is that the majority do believe that as they move with carbon initiatives, will increase ESG performances as they become more applicable to the stock markets, which is key for their growth. And it's an understanding that financing and that backing is absolutely critical. What you also see is that they believe that there will be an increase in revenues, obviously kind of upwards of 7+% by 2030 from renewable power. Now, that is interesting as we look towards their actual portfolios. There's going to have to be a massive increase in their current project plans if they're looking to meet that. So how can we achieve the goal, especially within the upstream sector? So I think some of the conversations that we're having with the clients today, right, are around the kind of 3 opportunities. And you'll see these as, we see these as kind of cleaning their core, acceleration of the transition, and extending their frontier. Now, in our conversations with clients, one client might kind of look completely at the likes of cleaning the core, or actually completely change their business model. The likes of Dong moving to Ørsted and completely changing and dumping its upstream portfolios, right? But this is probably a mixture for the majority of those clients, right? And it's interesting to understand the technology maturity that sits underneath that as a basis. So kind of cleaning the core is really minimizing the emissions and maximizing the efficiency from current infrastructure and value chains. As you see that emissions management is probably the base where we see a lot of our clients' conversations at the moment within this, as they look to really set a baseline for where they are today. I think some of the kind of fascinating statistics are coming out, right? For the IEA recently announced that they believe that the methane calculations of today are out by as much as 70% for countries, which is staggering when we think about it. And moving on to the kind of accelerating the transition is really kind of replacing today's source of energy and methods of consumption with a cleaner and net zero alternatives. So, as I said, looking towards distributed renewable power systems. And that's linking in with the likes of blue and then moving towards kind of green hydrogen as well. And then finally, kind of looking at towards extending the frontier, really. And this is kind of scaling the solutions and commercialize beyond what's feasible today. So really looking at like longer term into those future opportunities. Now, as I said, so the technology maturity that kind of sits underneath this and maps it does move left to right, and that's driving a lot of the companies in what they're able to achieve to date. So most of the conversations and most of the direction of what we see the portfolio is doing is in that clean and the core. However, the real benefits start to come when they accelerate towards that transition and pivoting to the clean energy systems. That's the way that they're going to really maximize and be able to cut down those emissions themselves. So I think if we go back to Menti, I'm just keen to see where everyone kind of sees and believes that they think the progress is to date and where we are. So if you log back into Menti onto your phones, let's have a look at that. So the next one. So is the industry doing enough today? Yeah, I think I would be pretty surprised. Okay, interesting. Some people are saying yes. I think I'd be interested to see in the comments why they think that might be the case. I think as a general consensus, the majority think that this is no, right? I think that can be seen from the outfall of what you saw from COP, which was pretty negative if we're honest with ourselves, in saying, look, what did it really achieve? And a lot of people now questioning what's the point in having them going forward? Because ultimately, is it just investors that and the people in the publics which actually need to do this, right? So saying that the energy transition really has to become a top 2 voting policy within countries for things to change. Now we're seeing that within the UK and across Europe. And a lot of people kind of would revert back to Greta Thunberg for this, and that's an interesting one. But I think we can all say, look, it is definitely like on our radar. But then when we look to the likes of China, India, and the key areas where we are needing to shift the transition, it's definitely not. And I think as long as it stays like that, we're going to have a hard push to move on this. So how is the industry performing against other industries? Is it lagging, leading, transforming? Oh, okay. Leading straight away, that's an interesting one. Being, again, interested to see what the thoughts are. See if it's, be interested again, people please do comment on if it's lagging, like what do we think we're lagging behind, right? Okay, a lot going for transforming. I like it. I think the leading one is a bit of an outlier there, if I'm honest, and I probably agree. I don't think I'd agree with us being a leading. We'll kind of share where our analysis has been done in the markets today, so you can see that in a minute as well. And what more can the industry do? Offsets. Yeah, so I think, I mean, I'm not going to touch on this today, but carbon credits, the likes, carbon pricing, etc., is a really interesting conversation, and one that I think you can probably go into for hours on end, right? Each having their positive and negatives, and each working for different places. Reducing scope 3, so I think that's a really interesting one. What we see is the majority of companies are focusing on scope 1 and 2, just because it's more within their remit and their frame, right? Scope 3 is hard to work with, hard to classify. Investing in new technology, absolutely. So you've got to accelerate the investment into the new technology, and also then the scalability of that technology. So I think that's, again, one of the key conversations we're having with clients is really like, how can you scale the technology today? MVPs are brilliant, right? But a lot of companies fall down at the ability to actually then scale that to the next level, scaling it beyond one asset, one offshore unit, so to the multiple ones. Clarity on regulations, absolutely. So regulations are a key part, and again, that's a live thing within for debate at the moment, but between a lot of people. Greater regulation needed on the likes of your cement and steel as well. Okay, I think that's all the questions, isn't it? Yeah. All right. So, progress to date and where we see it. So, the investments by the oil and gas companies, they are increasing, right? But if we're really honest with ourselves, I think, as you said earlier, and as a lot of you agree, it's still small scale. Now, these are taken from the IEA statistics, and at this point, kind of the 2021 ones were still an estimate, but this is largely true in what we're kind of seeing across. It's just not enough. Now, I think the big ones, especially kind of the offshore wind's an interesting one, and you're seeing like certain companies pick the areas that they're wanting to go into, and the investments and the companies that they're buying up as well. So a number of them are actually kind of buying in these capabilities around offshore wind, CCUS, and others. So and that's the way that they're looking to do that, but through acquisition at the moment. It seems to be one of the major ones now. There's a lot of work going on up in Aberdeen as well. And I guess probably kind of thoughts in your minds are, okay, so how is this skills transferable across from what you have today in reservoir engineers and moving into the likes of offshore wind? And that's where the likes of BP are thinking that that's an easy and transitionable skills. So I think one of the other kind of key ones to really understand is that as we hit, and I guess very topical, right? So the oil price is, I think, just topped at 114 today. It becomes a lot more feasible for the oil and gas companies to then invest and do things differently. 2 years ago, it was still a lot more difficult. So they've got the opportunity now. The IEA and a number of others, if you read in, are saying that this is when they can have, through cleaning up of kind of what we understand as tried and tested routes for the abatement of methane and reduction of methane emissions, they can kind of reduce up to kind of 40% of methane emissions and actually not hit their bottom lines due to the increase in the oil prices today from that. And through the likes of just cutting flaring, right? And clearly understanding their emissions, which are true from the use of kind of satellite technology as well, is something that we're again starting to hear and see more within our clients. What this is kind of saying is on the screen is that the offshore oil and gas industry is still highly capital intensive when you compare it against kind of renewable technologies, as we know today, for offshore wind, onshore wind, etc. So interesting kind of where we saw the oil and gas companies compared to others, and it really is sitting right there, kind of in the middle. I guess it's interesting to see how many of the companies have actually pledged to put net zero targets in, and the average year is there. Now, what we kind of understand that it's just not enough from the companies at the moment, and we really need to understand more. I guess the question is, it is a confusing landscape. It's the regulations out there, I think a number of you put in your comments, right? They're confusing. Carbon credits, the likes of them, and where we should be for different emissions and methane abatements is confusing. Clients are taking time and waiting to see who's going to be the first movers. So we've seen BP, Shell be quite early, and we've seen Exxon kind of shift because they had to, and the board movement, kind of Chevron sitting behind them. It's interesting to see European have been slightly more forward compared to the Americas, and then the state companies definitely further behind on that as well. And I think it's when we talk to our clients, again, as I said, some of them are wanting to move and go forward and be the first. As you see with like new technologies, everyone has a different way they're going to tackle these problems. Some think that if they move first, they'll be able to then take that leading position within the market, be the first and take up the number of the companies and bring in those new skills and be the leaders for bringing in people. As we see the oil and gas sector, it's definitely lagging on the applications from universities compared to other industries, and we'll touch on at the very end. But again, that's where majors who are the first movers are wanting to just change that. So we've also done a bit of a review against some key 8 oil majors that we see in the market today, all big household names that we know, and we did a bit of a review against their net zero targets. So this kind of summarizes, I guess, a lot of the things I've mentioned already. So their plans, I think, if we're honest about it, they have plans in place, but a lot of them are incomplete. I think you can read into them yourselves today, And I think you probably sit there and think, okay, what do we actually mean by trying to get to these targets, and how are they actually going to do it? So the companies that's definitely front of mind for them, and that definitely what we see is probably the first step is understanding where they stand, setting their own baselines. So the likes of emissions tracking, emissions management dashboards is the first kind of piece on that ladder. And then also data management as well. So as I said at the beginning, and the increase in digital and was picked up by someone on the Menti earlier. In order for companies to scale technologies and for us to kind of build the things which you might hear about, the likes of IoT technology, digital twins, and all of the new technology out there, they have to have a solid platform on what to do that. Solid data platforms is a big thing within, again, what our clients are talking to us about, and you'll see and hear about OSDU as a bit of a shaker in that sector as well, and what it's trying to do and supporting movement for clients. But those are probably the two big ones that we hear from our clients at the moment. Is a lot on, as I said, data and common data platforms, being able to shift data across easily, breaking down kind of typical silos that you would have had, and then moving into understanding what their kind of baseline is today. So looking at that reporting frequency, as I said, that's really where they're wanting to move with that, and I think they're all agreeing that they need to do more on reporting. They haven't done it well enough to date. And when you look across the aging assets, as I said, so how are you going to monitor emissions on an aging asset which has been there for kind of 30, 40 years in the desert? They don't have flow meters on all their pieces of equipment. So there's a lot of estimation. There's a lot of Excel spreadsheets out there. There's a lot of kind of guesses, if we're honest about it. And they are seeing that change, right? So they're seeing that they need to change, and they need to change quickly. So that's where the likes of this technology can really support them, the likes of a digital twin being able to monitor and do that for them. Bringing in IoT technology, but as I said, you have to have that basis first. Scope 3 coverage. So as I said previously, right? So it's some of the majors we're talking to are starting to breach out into that, and you'll see that in the news, in the papers, right? Starting to cover that, but if we're honest, that there's not a full understanding of this across the value chain today. And then lastly, kind of looking at kind of carbon credit usage, right? So none of the players have ruled out this, but they don't want to kind of rely on it kind of going forward, and it's a key one. So I think, interestingly, as we see today as well, right, we're seeing companies starting to really republish themselves as well. So Total Energies, Dong, Ørsted, Qatar, Statoil, right? A number of them are wanting to move away from what they were previously and rebrand themselves as energy companies of the future. And that's, again, is why I think this sector is fascinating, right? We have renewable companies, and then we have these companies wanting to shift and change themselves. And that's how I see it. I see the future is definitely here in helping and supporting these guys doing this. So I think looking at the kind of the total renewable kind of energy capacity, I think you'll probably notice that BP and Shell, as I said, they're the leaders in this really right at the moment. And BP are huge around the offshore wind capacity as well, and the recent companies that they're looking to buy out through this. But I think as we kind of move forward, and we'll see hopefully a bigger change over the next kind of 5 to 10 years. And I think the number of acquisitions that will happen, I think a number of people agree that that's going to be a huge shift as the likes of these companies they need to buy in those expertise. And I think they're shifting internally on those skill sets as well. So I think lastly, where we want to kind of sit is really looking at the end, like the talent gap, and I think this is is a massive concern for our clients, and where they move forward. And I've mentioned it a number of times now, is the skills gap that we're seeing now. If we're honest, the oil and gas market isn't the most popular place to go and work. We're seeing institutions are taking away university courses kind of focused on this because it's a dirty word. But there is a change, and they are, as I said, the companies are rebranding themselves, trying to make themselves more enticing for talent and skills. And I think, as I said at the beginning, you don't necessarily have to go through that the old traditional ways, in a sense, to working with these clients in the future. I think if I want to try and say something to everyone on the call, it's hopefully you're all as kind of enticed into it, and I think seeing this as a critical need and understanding what needs to be done. As I said, it's probably got to kind of act in the next kind of 4 or 5 years, so we're going to see a lot of movement, hopefully. And I think it really is down to us. And it's something that I'm fascinated and I absolutely love, and it kind of brings me to work on a daily basis, right? So I guess I'll probably end it there and just say a very big kind of thank you very much. I'm really interested to kind of hear any kind of questions or comments from people on the call.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot, Jamie. That was really insightful. That was great. I think there's a couple of questions in the chat. I've also asked if you do have any questions, please do raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can pose your question to Jamie. I think there's one from David Johnston who's asking, shouldn't we also be asking why the government is not doing enough, as opposed to just focusing on oil and gas companies, and what more can be done from a regulations perspective, in your opinion? Yeah,
so really good question. There's a lot more that can be done from regulation. So I think the institutions that support us in the UKI energy sector, supporting the North Sea, are really asking for that as well, right? It's a bit woolly, to be honest, from the government on some of those regulations, and there's a lot of misunderstanding of what they mean by some of the nomenclature that they're using. They need to be firmer, and I think that's not just in the oil and gas sector, but across a number. When you look at, as I said earlier, kind of steel and cement issues as well, CEOs are coming out and saying, look, you're slapping on us tariffs of having to work in a more cleaner and transition, whereas that's increasing our costs, and then they're being undercut by other players in the market who don't necessarily have to abide by potentially the conditions of different local governments. So they really need to work it out, and they need to work it out quickly. A lot of people will agree that it's a two-pronged attack. It has to be regulation from government, but then it also has to be change from within on the company side as well.
Wonderful. And I think there's one from Vikas asking, what role will digital play within the broader energy transition for these companies? I know you touched upon data management and kind of emissions tracking.
Yeah, so I think we see digital as kind of underpinning it as a basis. So as I said, data is really key for this, and data sits within digital, right? So it's the basis from what they can build everything. You have to have data at your fingertips to be able to understand how to move, and then that is your core. If you're going to look at it, I think it's your core to scaling technology. It's your core to able to manage that technology, if it offshore wind and remote working, etc. It's all moving that way, and it's an absolute critical necessity. And that's why I think, again, kind of understanding and growing your skills within digital data analytics, machine learning, those are all critical kind of things that we're seeing our clients want more of. So again, encourage you to kind of do a bit of side reading around it, right? Increase your skill sets. If I tell anyone coming up these days, coming out of university, I say, look, understand the basis of those kind of topics, data analytics, blockchain, they're all hot topics, and they're going to become critical and the basis for your foundation going forward.
Brilliant. And that is something that the oil and gas companies have picked up on, and that they're within the midst of this transition as they move from legacy systems towards the digital future.
Definitely, 100%.
And I think there was another one: will energy transition affect the supply and demand of energy markets?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. I think I'll kind of revert back to some of the podcasts you listened to on this, right? So obviously the geopolitics that affects it today is fascinating, right? And we're seeing it play out right now, right? So OPEC messed yesterday, and it was only 3 minutes to basically say, look, we're not really going to shift our position. And you have the likes of Saudi who are able to really swing how things are, and you have the central players who can dictate the global politics and where things move. Now, moving forward, in a net zero world, we're much more run off electricity. Now, electricity by its basis is more localized. So I think what they see is a massive drop in trade of energy by as much as 70%. Now, there will still be the trade of the likes of hydrogen and other low-cost energies like that, but there's a huge drop, and the global politics that surrounds energy today will be different. It'll be a different landscape, and again, something that's just fascinating to be a part of, because that dictates how the world moves today.
Definitely. And would you say part of the issue with the labeled slow pace of transition is because these companies, legacy oil and gas companies, are having to re-strategize and, shift their focus from oil to being more human-centric and greener as well?
So I think it's an interesting one, right? So it's slow. I wouldn't say, I think it's just slow by nature, right? These guys, if we're honest about it, it's the bottom line at the end of the day for them. It's paying back to their investors. That is at the heart of a lot of the decisions for a lot of these companies. Now you've seen BP Shell move, but it's really hit their investor bottom line, right? And their position within the stock market. And the others are staying up and staying higher as we pump more. And as I said, like the petrostates are only going to grow stronger through the transition, because the volatility that this brings and the era that we're in right now, the petrostates benefit off that, right? You see it in the gas prices and what's happened over the last winter. They're only going to become stronger. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jamie. I think there's one from Adrian around blue hydrogen that needs cheap natural gas, cheap 50p per therm. I'm not sure, Adrian, is that more of a statement, or did you have a question that you'd like to pose to Jamie? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Okay, maybe we can get back to that one.
Yeah. Come back to it.
I think there's one from Jennifer. So typically, people do not like change. Do we see the general workforce engaged with this topic? So not high-level management, but the people on the ground kind of thing.
Great question. Change and change management of the people is probably one of the biggest things that we see within our clients and trying to tackle as well, right? You're completely right. People don't like to change. People like doing their day jobs. coming in, especially within this sector, and the other kind of cushy area that we live in, right? So it is difficult. And you get differing levels from like top level management through to middle management through to I guess the bottom levels of the company. And I think middle management is typically where you see the biggest resistance to that change area, and they're the ones sitting at a lot of the decision points. It's difficult in understanding. Probably the biggest one we're seeing is their hesitance around kind of scalability as well, and really putting money into investment areas for companies. So people who probably hold the purse strings for particular product lines, etc. That's probably where the biggest resistance to change sits today, is what we're seeing. But I think as we kind of go up, everyone within university and coming up through the low levels and working in the first few years of industry today understands the need for it, right? So that's the kind of the polar opposites you potentially see in companies at the moment, and we see that. And I think hopefully as we move, as I said, through the next kind of 10 years, we'll see those people kind of move into the more positions where they're able to make those decisions, and we'll hopefully see a bit more of a change more rapidly.
Wonderful. And there's a final one from Francesca asking, what is Accenture as a company doing to transition?
Great question. So Accenture as itself is really kind of supporting all industries, right? And that's one of the kind of the main things for us. I think it's looking to kind of move towards as itself kind of 100% renewable power for the offices by itself. Accenture is a kind of consultancy, right? So looking for kind of zero waste achieved. It's looking for kind of 30% reduction by kind of FY22 for UK emissions as well. So it's kind of already kind of hit those targets. But I think more importantly, in a sense, what it's trying to do with its clients is help them on this journey. And it's really helping them from all the discussions that we spoke about today, from understanding where they currently sit in emissions management and data platforms. And that's where we sit. Wonderful.
Thanks a lot for that, Jamie. Before we bring it to a close, was there any other questions, guys? Okay, Adrian, that question was on blue hydrogen. How commercial is it without cheap feedstock?
That's a bit of a curveball, Adrian. I'm not going to try and bullshit you. I think not my topic area, if I'm honest with you. So I'm sorry about that. I'd have to probably kind of divert to others, and we can come back to you. I'm sure. Don't know if that's kind of possible through the YP.
Definitely. I mean, if someone would like to, who knows the answer, would like to answer that question on the call, feel free to unmute yourself as well.
Maybe I can give it a go. So as I understand it, there's a couple of different commercial levers that can bring down the overarching cost of blue hydrogen. You are completely right that without a cheap feedstock, it isn't going to be feasible at all. The other lever that you can probably pull on is decreasing the cost of CCS. As I understand it, there's like a 10-fold decrease. So if you can reduce CCS costs by something like £10 per tonne, you can reduce the blue hydrogen costs by 0.1 pounds per tonne. But yeah, cheap feedstock is definitely required for blue hydrogen. That's my take anyway.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Francesca.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, guys. Yeah, I think that kind of brings our session to a close. Jamie, if you could go back to the Menti, we do have one final Menti for the SPE section. We'd love to get your thoughts in terms of what you would like to see in terms of events in the future. Next one. Yeah, so again, same Menti code 74573049. we'll just give you guys 30 seconds to give us some thoughts. It'll be great to get your feedback.
Any further deep dives potentially on the topic around net zero, specifically as the ones you kind of mentioned already? There's lots to kind of go into, I know.
Whilst we're waiting on that, a question has popped up as well on blockchain and its application in the future of the industry.
So I think blockchain is an interesting one. It's at the moment, I wouldn't call one of the kind of hot topics that we are speaking to our clients about. There's lots of uses for blockchain, right? But it's definitely not the most critical technology at the moment, is probably what I say. I think there's lots of ways of looking at it within carbon and understanding of trading, but just for key technologies that the industry is really focusing on, is, as I said, more around kind of common data platforms, the more data analytics, and moving in that dimension really, right? Understanding and being able to capture and analyze the data faster, which is what we see and understand that just previously wasn't there.
Wonderful. I think we've got some comments here as well. I think people would like to see more around net zero, more specifically around hydrogen. I think what we presented today is, broad, and there's definitely a lot more topics that we can unpack in the future.
100%. I think that's is a key, and as I said, hopefully this has sparked a bit of interest in that going forward, right? Circular economies, absolutely key, emissions monitoring, and there's probably a load more you can go into on what the latest is on that and where people stand, right? Governance, as we've already mentioned, is absolutely central to that as well going forward.
Wonderful.
Perfect.
Well, thank you very much for your time,
thanks
Jamie.
very much. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure. I hope it was as insightful as it was for me. And guys, if there's anything else you'd like to see in the future, please do feel free to reach out on our Gmail, SPE email, and we will definitely love to take that forward. Thanks a lot, everybody. Great seeing everybody. Have a good evening. Take care.